Drew Allar is a former 5-star recruit who committed to Penn State in 2021. Today, I'm going to play his college career while trying to win a Big Ten championship, a national championship, and a Heisman Trophy. Do you think Drew Allar can do it all? I'm picking up where Penn State is at in real life with 7 wins and 2 losses. Sean Clifford is the starting quarterback this season, and since he's a senior, Drew Allar will be QB1 next year. After a terrible home loss to Nebraska, the rest of the season fell apart, and it was time for Drew Allar to start. He had a pretty solid offseason, and he opened up his sophomore year against West Virginia. He was ready to play in front of our home crowd, and he didn't disappoint, throwing a touchdown early in the game. At 6'5", with an amazing arm, he was the perfect build for a future star in the NFL. But for now, he was in college, and he was going to make sure he left his mark on Penn State football. His debut couldn't have gone any better, and with his next opponent being Youngstown State, he was set to have another game where he went out and dominated. Obviously, the Penguins didn't stand a chance, and Drew Allar couldn't stop scoring touchdowns, so we picked up an easy win. But it was time for his first rivalry game, and he didn't seem to struggle at all on the road against Temple, going for 6 touchdowns in a 27-point win. We opened up Big Ten play at Northwestern, and even though he started off the game with a laser, Drew Allar would struggle for a large portion of the matchup, making bad reads, but in the end, we would still win. And it reminded us that we would still struggle against good teams. Luckily, we didn't have to play anyone hard until week 11, and since Purdue hadn't won a game yet this season, beating them at home was almost a given, with Drew Allar dropping dimes left and right. I couldn't believe he threw 4 touchdowns before the end of the first half, and Penn State fans were thrilled with his performance. He was already on the Heisman watch list as a sophomore, and playing a winless Maryland team was perfect because it just gave him another opportunity to pad his stats. There was no way that the Terrapin defense could stop this 6'5" machine, and after another easy win, we were sitting at number 3 in the top 25. But then we had to travel to play at Rutgers, and with it pouring down hard there, Drew Allar struggled to move the ball. He was on upset alert for the first time ever, and the pressure was getting to him. Fortunately, star running back Nick Singleton was able to take over and tie it up. He was the only reason this game would go to overtime, which is where Drew Allar would come out and finally shine. He was unstoppable on the goal line, and that was enough to escape 7-0. This was our last easy game for a while, because after this, conference play would get difficult. Drew Allar started the game off with an easy touchdown read, and it would turn into a blowout in the snow. Our fans were loving Drew, but it was time for a tough road matchup, and we were playing Michigan at the Big House. It was a packed stadium, but Drew Allar wanted to make sure his family got tickets to see him play, so that's why he used SeatGeek to find them the best seats in the stadium. SeatGeek ended up saving him $20 on his first purchase, and if you use code Bordeaux, you can get that same deal. They're just a ticketing app that makes buying tickets super simple, and coming from my experience, it's the best way to acquire tickets. SeatGeek helps you attend games with great seats like these, and if you want to find the best deals, look for the green dots. That's where you're going to find the best value for your buck. Again, code Bordeaux or the first link in my description will get you $20 off your first purchase on SeatGeek, and now that Drew Allar's family had tickets to the game, they would get to watch their son play in this top 10 matchup from the front row. Michigan held him scoreless through the first quarter, and at the start of the second, he threw an interception on the goal line. It was a defensive battle, but Caden Saunders made this incredible catch, and that put us within 1 at the half. By the fourth quarter, it was clear that we didn't have what it took to come into the Big House and win on the road, so we would end up losing our first game of the year, and Drew Allar was no longer on the Heisman watch. It felt like one game ruined our whole season, but we had a chance to redeem ourselves at Ohio State, and on the first play of the game, Drew Allar took a deep shot to Caden Saunders, which ended up putting us in amazing field position. That would lead to us taking an early lead on the Buckeyes, but it all pretty much went downhill from there with tons of turnovers and a 14-point loss to Ohio State. If Drew Allar could end the year with some great performances, he might still have a chance at winning the Heisman Trophy, but that was the only goal he could possibly achieve with the Big Ten Championship and the college football playoffs off the table. He set a school season record with that touchdown throw, and he did just enough to get us our 9th win. There was no denying how good he was, and and next year Penn State would be a real threat. We had weapons at almost every position, so after we took down Indiana, we were ready to get into Drew's junior year, and hopefully win the Heisman next year. He had played really well for a sophomore, but he had even bigger goals for Penn State than winning the All-State Sugar Bowl. He had already set numerous school records, and after Drew Allar got up to a 93 overall in the offseason, he was ready to begin his junior year as he was already on the Heisman watch list. However, we were projected to finish third in the division, so we had a lot to prove this season, and just like you'd expect, our rivals didn't stand a chance. At this point, Drew Allar was tearing apart their defense for fun as he finished with 6 touchdowns on the day. But our next matchup was going to be brutal because we were playing number 2 Alabama on the road. However, Drew Allar didn't seem to struggle much, and by the end of the first half, we had a 21-point lead on the Crimson Tide. In the end, we escaped with a win, and I couldn't have been more proud. We were now the number 3 team in the country, so this result wasn't a surprise at all. Big Ten Conference play started against Purdue, and Drew Allar ended the first quarter with a nice little touchdown throw. He was going to need a lot of those to win the Heisman Trophy, and the Boilermakers couldn't have made it any easier for him, leaving receivers wide open. The undefeated season wasn't stopping anytime soon, with our next opponent being Iowa. Since their offense was abysmal, all we needed to do was score a couple of times, because there wasn't a chance they were catching up to us after that. With a score like this, I'd consider it torture to make those poor kids watch Iowa football, so hopefully they stopped watching after the first quarter wave. Drew Allar scored 8 total touchdowns, and he wasn't slowing down the following week at Maryland. I'm not sure there was a defense that could stop him, because he put up 6 touchdowns like it was nothing. Through 6 games, he had 28 touchdowns, and his next test was against 6-1 Rutgers. So far, they had played pretty well, but that didn't seem to matter to Drew Allar and the Penn State offense, who did whatever they wanted and made it look easy. We had a couple of difficult games coming up, but first, we had to travel to Minnesota, where Drew Allar couldn't be stopped. He broke a school career record in just a season and a half, which shows how wild the stats are that he was putting up. We got to host Michigan this year, and Drew Allar wasn't going to let the Wolverines ruin the undefeated run he was putting together. Even though we went into the half down by 3, he was determined to make sure we escaped the game on top. So that is exactly what he did. It was a lot closer than we would have liked, but in the end, a win's a win. And it was time for the game of the year. Both teams hadn't lost yet this season, so a spot in the Big Ten Championship was on the line today. And we kept trading touchdowns back and forth. Caden Saunders made an amazing catch with a minute and a half left, but he dropped the game-tying 2-point conversion, so we ended up losing to the Buckeyes. But that wouldn't end our national championship hopes. We just needed to make sure we won our last 2 games of the year, and we should sneak into the playoffs. Drew Allar also still had a pretty good shot at winning the Heisman as long as he kept putting up crazy numbers, which is exactly what he ended up doing against Michigan State on the road. And that put him in the number 1 Heisman candidate spot. Our last regular season game was in Indiana, and Drew Allar needed to throw for a ton of touchdowns today. He started off the first quarter with a couple of dots, and he couldn't stop throwing lasers into the end zone. He ended up finishing the game with 6 touchdowns, but since we didn't make the conference championship, these stats would have to be good enough to win the Heisman. But unfortunately, Drew Allar lost by 1 vote, and none of the other awards mattered to him. However, we snuck into the college football playoffs so Drew Allar could get his revenge on Ohio State and prove that he was the one that deserved the Heisman Trophy. With about 2 minutes left in the game, he threw the go-ahead touchdown, but after Ohio State scored at the last second, we found ourselves in overtime against the Buckeyes, and we ended up getting on the board first. After our defense got a huge interception in the 3rd overtime, all we needed was 3, and this kick would send us to the championship. Our opponent would be Florida State, and it was time for Drew Allar's national championship debut. He started off the game by throwing a touchdown and breaking Joe Burrow's NCAA touchdown record. He was that guy, elevating Penn State football to a whole different level of play, and it's no surprise with less than a minute left in the game, he delivered an extremely clutch and beautifully placed ball. That throw put us in the position to win it all, and his collegiate career would end with a national championship because he decided he was going to declare for the draft after the game. And with just 2 years of crazy college performances, he ended up going as the first pick of the draft to the Houston Texans.